ask you a question. Have you have you known somebody who ever been in a state of wanting to lose weight? And if so, was it really clear how you or they should lose weight? Was it really clear what caused the weight gain in the first place? And if it was clear and you were sure, how do you know that? How were you sure that you were right? This is a far bigger world than most people realize. I was in Japan once with Toyota. They had tiny hotel rooms. Pardon the digression, but this story is going to ring true throughout the rest of the morning. They had tiny hotel rooms. I was looking around. I was surprised to find that they have like something like the Gideons. The Gideons leave Bibles in hotel rooms in the Western Hemisphere. And again, be patient with me for a second. Well, they don't leave Bibles. They are Christian Bibles. They leave the Buddhist version of a Bible. I picked it up and I thought, this is interesting. I've heard this. There was a story in there that I'd heard a million times. The 6 blind men and the elephant. And again, as we start talking, if you haven't heard this, it becomes very clear why this is a big issue for managing weight and obesity. The 6 blind men came up. I'll just talk about 3 of them. The first one comes up to the front of the elephant, feels the trunk and says, oh, this is like a snake curling around my hand. The one in the back says, no, you're wrong. He's feeling the tail and it's long and like a rope, but it's not curling around his hand. It's like a rope, not a snake. The third guy's feeling the leg. And he says, no, you're both wrong. It's like a palm tree. It's like a tree trunk. And so, the rest of the story. I'm not going to belabor that. I've gone far enough down that bunny hole. But the moral of the story was each of the blind men was right when he described what he was seeing, what he was experiencing. But on the other hand, each of them was wrong when they were denying what the others were seeing. And that's what obesity management is today. I mean, you go on the internet and you get beat up for everything. And I'm going to get beat up today, maybe by a few people for being politically correct or all too inclusive. This is neither. This is hard science. We interviewed Robert Lustig last week. It was a great interview. I had a blast, but I also have to apologize and give you some information and unpack some stuff before we get into the interview. We'll also only be able to do portions of it today. The first portion about the unified model and about obesogens. Now, you may not have heard about either one of them. And again, that's why I'm saying, give me a few minutes, give me some patience. He got animated when I told him about my background as a physician scientist at Hopkins. So then he switches into medical science mode. For those of you who don't know Robert Lustig, he's one of the most well-known nutrition scientists in the world these days. He's a food activist. He spends a good bit of time beating up on big food and big government for not protecting citizens better in terms of the food supply. And so, again, after the 3rd or 4th time of using the terms obesogens, then adipose tissue and adipocytes and all of that, I'm sitting there thinking, yes, I understand all this, but this is about helping people on YouTube understand this. I'm going to have to interrupt. And I said, I'm not. And then I finally said, yeah, I'm going to interrupt. And the 3rd or 4th time he said obesogen, I interrupted and said, in other words, things that make you fat. He disappeared. I thought, oh my gosh, I'm ticked him off and he's vacated the premises. It turns out he came back. He was having some connection problems. But while I'm here, let me just define obesogen really quickly. An obesogen, break it down. Obese is body fat. Ogen means it creates that. So it's something that makes you fat. You can see it in the food supply, in the water supply, especially in the food supply, but also even in the air. We began to get introduced to the concept of obesogens. Those of us who didn't go into toxicology first heard about obesogens in the 60s and 70s with a book called Silent Spring. I think it was by Rachel Carson, and it talks about DDT. It was a herbicide, pesticide that got used a lot, very, very popular. And part of its injury mechanism is to make you fat, make you gain fat. So it turns out that's not the only one out there. And this is not just about obesogens and environmental stuff. For those of you who don't like to hear about it, this is about a lot more than that. A couple of other obesogens before we get back out of that bunny hole would be PBAs. You know, you heard of DDT long ago. Now, more recently, you've heard of PBAs. And if you're thinking, what's a PBA? It's those things in plastics that you can get in water, especially if it sits in plastic in the heat. And again, those things can make you fat too. Things that nonstick coatings for pots and pans, I think it's PAHs, those can do it. You know, there's just tons and tons of them. In my training for occupational medicine, I had to learn a lot about toxins, and there's just a lot of toxins out there. That's one of the things that Lustig's article was about. You'll see him mention in the clip that he was very excited. He and his team had just published an article in a very, very good magazine, Nature Medicine, and I believe it was Nature Medicine Nutrition. Very, very well respected magazine. I think he was more excited about the obesogens part. When I read it, I was far more excited about the unified model part. So speaking about the unified model and the 6 blind men of the elephant, let's go back and talk about that for a minute. You'll hear him say, well, Brewer, everybody knows that a calorie is just a calorie. You may not. You may understand that that's not the case. That he's talking there about the first and simplest model of metabolism and their metabolism and weight management. It's the first or second law of thermodynamics. We can't create or destroy energy. So, you know, you put a serving of food in a bomb calorimeter, heat it up, burn it, and the heat that it generates in calories is the heat of that food. Now, that ignores several things. One of the things that ignores, if you go back to a recent interview that Lustig had with Andrew Huberman, he talks about a couple of things. Number one, feeding the 300 trillion bugs we have in our colon, our biome, our microbiome. They eat fiber. And so you eat almonds, the third of those calories actually go to feed those bugs, not to feed you. So the energy balance model ignores that. You eat a porterhouse steak, as they discussed, and anywhere between a quarter of the calories, maybe more, may actually go into cleaving that amino group. Pardon, you don't have to remember this part, but actually metabolizing the protein to a point where we can digest it. So a calorie is more than just a calorie. And one of the things that the energy balance model ignores is insulin. So that gets us to the next model of metabolism management. The first is the energy balance model. And we'll go over these with some images in a minute, the images that they used in their article. But verbally, let's just cover it first. Like I said, it's going to take a few minutes. Please be patient with me. The carbohydrate insulin model points out that hormones are a big deal. You know, we're not machines. We're not bomb calorimeters. We're human beings. And hormones really impact our behavior. If you don't believe that, try raising a teenager. Well, that becomes clear, but then we forget about the fact that hormones drive middle-aged food behavior, in addition to teenagers and kids as well. Now, what are some of the hormones that we are talking about here? Well, if you go back to the book, a couple of books by Gary Taubes, he talks about what he called the hormone theory, and he was really talking about carbohydrate insulin model. You'll see as we get into further models that hormones, we don't use Gary Taubes' old term of the hormone theory of weight management anymore, because several other models, the obesogen model, the redox model, all are very much involved with other hormones. So the carbohydrate insulin model deals mostly with that one hormone, insulin. So what happens is our body starts to get resistant to insulin. If we get resistant to insulin, our blood sugar goes up. If our blood sugar goes up, our brain notices that and sends messages to put out more insulin. What most people don't realize, and Jeannie and Heather will talk about that just a minute after we cover the clips. Insulin, high levels of insulin stop our ability to burn fat. So what started out as a simple problem with burning carbs very quickly becomes a problem with burning both carbs and fats. So our body starts to go into what you'll hear Lustig mention as the redox metabolism. That's don't panic over that. It just stands for reduction oxidation. I'm not going to go down that bunny hole, other than to say, when patients come to see us, that's what we start doing. We start doing lab tests and opening up their metabolism so patients can begin to see this redox metabolism that Lustig mentions. Many people have heard about it on the internet, but they really didn't connect the dots. The oxidative metabolism that happens with diabetes. You have problems burning carbs, problems burning fats. You get inefficient burns, incomplete burns, and you get storage. Your body starts saying, hey, I'm not getting enough energy. So it starts saying, let's eat more. I need more energy, so I need more food. So eat more. Gary Taubes, when he first started talking about this, says this multiple times in his two books, Good Calories, Bad Calories, or Why We Get Fat and What to Do About It. He says, we think we get fat because we're eating more, and that's not really what's happening. It's the opposite. We're eating more because we're getting fat, and we're getting fat because of the hormones that are starting to fail. So, again, when we start talking about the hormones that are involved with food, it gets a little bit more complicated. And I'm going to go there for just a minute because it really is important to understand that third metabolic model that Lustig mentions in the interview clip we're going to show, that redox model. So one of the hormones is called leptin. Many people have heard of leptin. It's the satiety hormone. It's the hormone that says, hey, I've had enough to eat. Let's slow down. That hormone is made by fat cells. And by the way, you'll hear him say adipocytes or adipose tissue several times. That's the same thing as fat cells. Adipose just means fat, medical term. There's a lot of other hormones that fat cells are involved with. Another one is called resistin. You may not have heard of that before. It's once you begin to understand what it is and what it does, it really starts to help you understand the diabetic, pre-diabetic metabolism. Resistin shuts down the door to the fat cell. It's that when the fat cell expands to where it's like stretching and saying, I can't take anymore, it starts releasing a hormone called resistin. Resistin does exactly what you might think. It makes the insulin receptors resistant to insulin. So if the insulin receptors are resistant to insulin, what happens to sugar coming into the fat cell for storage? It doesn't come in. It's those receptors are now resistant. Now, fat cells also make another one called, again, here's that root word, adipose, adiponectin. Adiponectin actually makes those insulin receptors more sensitive. And in fact, it opens the door for blood sugar to come into the fat cell. And adiponectin is made by fat cells when they are at a low storage capacity. They don't have a lot of fat stored in them. So now we've already mentioned three hormones involved with managing food behavior. One is insulin. The second is resistin. The third is leptin. Oh, actually four, then adiponectin. There's yet another, ghrelin, the hunger hormone. And before we get out of this bunny hole on hormones and food behavior, what's the biggest one in terms of our culture these days? The GLP-1s, glucagon-like proteins. GLP-1s, Ozempic. Ozempic is nothing but a hormone that's been recreated. It's a hormone created by the intestine, and that hormone is released by intestines when they start getting full of food, and they're sending messages to your brain to say, hey, we're full, we're getting ready to dump stuff in the, dump some food in the bloodstream. Don't eat more. And by the way, to the stomach, stop working, stop pushing food down into us. We're busy right now. And to the pancreas, the GLP-1s are the intestines and GLP-1s are saying, we're getting ready to dump food in the bloodstream. You need to start releasing insulin. So that's it for the bunny hole for hormones for right now. So now you can begin to see that metabolism, energy metabolism, is far more complicated than a bomb calorimeter, calorie in, calorie out. You just need to have more discipline. A lot more stuff is going on here than just that. The first model is thermodynamics, calories in, calories out. Nobody's saying that doesn't work. That is very true. But then when you begin to think about what we are in terms of biological creatures, human beings, hormones become very important. There's multiple levels of hormone involvement here. The first one is eating carbs and insulin. That creates its own set of problems. Then, as you'll see, and we discuss in our group, Heather and Jeannie will talk a little bit more about the redox metabolism, the metabolism that most of us start aging into, where we burn both carbs and then fats inefficiently, creating problems for our health, which ends up leading to hypertension, high blood pressure, heart attack, stroke, blindness, kidney disease, Alzheimer's, or dementia, et cetera, et cetera. You've heard me say that. We've got, what, 2,000 videos. You've probably heard me say that at least 6,000 times. So, as I said before, there's yet another model, the obesogens. And to the credit of Lustig and his team, those things are real. We don't focus that much on them. one of the problems that we have is that we know that the second and third models are so important to human health right now. If we can just help people get a handle on carbohydrate insulin model and the redox model, that will help move our patients. And it does. I mean, we get lots of very good feedback from people. I had 2 more people yesterday say, yep, I lost 30 pounds, but you helped me do it. And thank you so much. So that's why I'm doing this instead of playing golf. I get a lot more positive feedback and I do better at this than golf. So let's now go back and show the clip and well, no, don't show the clip yet. I need to show some images first and go over this one more time. Gilbert, if you'll help me show the images, I'll try to explain those, and then we'll go to the clip and let Lustig explain it from his words.
Doc, is it the PowerPoint, Doc?
The PowerPoint, yes. Oh, by the way, we hit 200,000 subscribers. Thank you very much. And we'll move on. So today's feature is what you need to know to finally lose weight. And the bottom line is that, like the 6 blind men and the elephant, this is a bigger issue than what you've probably been thinking about and seeing alone and on your own. And yes, I'm a big fan of Robert Lustig, one of the foremost nutrition researchers in the world. He's written several books, The Hacking of the American Mind, about big food, big government, and their complicity in basically making profits off of or protecting the profits of big food by doing some of the things that we talked about. And again, I'm not quite so much of a conspiracy theorist, but when you look at the information that we're talking about, this is science. This is not, politics gets involved, but this is science. And yes, it does happen. For those of you who don't know Lustig, he has one of the highest viewed videos on YouTube, 24 million views, and it was about sugar, the bitter truth, talking about how sugar in and of itself becomes a toxin for us. So the article that he was talking about, he starts off with the video clip saying, "I'm just so excited. We just published this article about obesogens, a unifying theory for the global rise in obesity." The last thing I'll say before we go into the rest of the slides and the images and then into the clip is that even though he does do a good job of presenting a unified theory, the whole elephant, not just the trunk, not just the tail, is that even he doesn't spend that much time talking about the addictions associated and the addiction models of obesity. He also doesn't spend a lot of time talking about inflammation. I think it was Heather that was making me aware yesterday when we were talking about this, that, you know, thyroid, most of us know that thyroid disease is a big driver for heart disease. And what we fail to acknowledge sometimes is that thyroid disease is a big problem, a big cause of metabolic disease. That's where and how it causes some of its heart disease risk. And that starts off as inflammation of the thyroid. Have you ever heard of Hashimoto's thyroiditis? Again, I won't go further down that bunny hole, but just, again, for clarity's sake, repeat with images the models. Energy balance model, calories in, calories out. If you bring in more calories than you burn, you're going to start gaining weight. If you burn more calories than you bring in, you're going to start losing weight. The insulin resistance model, or carbohydrate insulin model. You start getting a little bit resistant to insulin, and that can happen from obesity, what we talked about earlier in this introduction. It most often happens because of aging, just a part of aging. And some people would say, well, that's mostly genetics. Other people would say, no, it's mostly increased exposure to carbs. Bottom line is, it's not very clear. But that's the carbohydrate insulin model. And that is, you start losing your ability to burn carbs. That causes your blood sugar to go up. Blood sugar goes up. Insulin goes up. Insulin causes you to not burn fats anymore. So now you can't burn either one. And your body says, hey, I'm hungry. Let's eat some more. We probably shouldn't have had quite the imagery here on the redox model, but there is truth to it. Jesus developed this. And basically, the core part of this thing is the mitochondria. The mitochondria are the furnaces of the cell. And most of us have heard about redox. And in fact, you may have heard about it and not known it. Have you heard about the antioxidants in the supplement world? Over the past 20 or 30 years, the antioxidants in the supplement world, mostly vitamins A, C, and E, have become really, really big. And it's because of this acknowledgement that as we age, the mitochondria are core to what's happening. Those of you who've studied David Sinclair all know that he's trying to find a supplement that's going to help shore up ailing function of the mitochondria. Those of you that take niacin, nicotinamide, and NMN, all of those different things are helping to support things called sirtuins and other chemicals that are very much involved in ADP, very much involved in the currency of energy as managed by the mitochondria. And again, Jeannie and Heather and I will talk a little bit more about the medical bioindicators of problems in this area and how they help our patients understand what's going on in their body. This whole thing of test, don't guess. And one of the things that Lustig goes on about, seemed to be most excited about, was getting more information and focus on obesogens, things that are in our water, our air, and especially our food supply that make us fat. And then they go on, they describe the point about the 6 blind men and the elephant. This is bigger than any one individual thought. So you'll hear experts say, no, this is silly. It's all about calories in, calories out. Yep. Then you'll hear others say, no, that's silly. That's not correct either. It's carbohydrates. This is all of these models work. And again, it goes back to my original question for you. If you've ever had problems losing weight, what was the reason? How did you fix it? Or if you knew somebody, and how did they fix it? And how did they know what the reasons were? Now, bottom line is, obesity is a complex issue. Carbs are a key part of the problem, and calories matter, just not as much as people think. Genetics, environment, and other causes of obesity are also things that we need to be dealing with. Speaking of which, let's start with a quick clip of Eric Clapton. What's this got to do with Eric Clapton? Well, I have to tell you, Robert Lustig says that sugar is a gateway drug. I know the whole term gateway drug is politically, everything's politically charged these days. But Gilbert, are you ready to show that 20-second clip of Eric Clapton with his interview with Ed Bradley about how he started his addictions to drugs and alcohol?
I couldn't get through a day without doing something to alter my consciousness.
And it started with heroin, the addiction.
It started with sugar.
Sugar?
Oh, yeah. When I was 5, 6 years old, I was cramming sugar down my throat as fast as I could get it down. Sweets, sugar on bread and butter. I became addicted to sugar because it changed the way I felt.
So if you're saying, oh, you guys are overreacting, food, yeah, I know what you mean about foods and addictions, but you shouldn't call it addictions. Okay. you know, go argue with Eric Clapton about that. Anyway, so I think that helps us set up and unpack some of the things that Lustig just rips through in physician science mode. Why don't we get to the first few minutes of the interview with Lustig last week?
And the reason is because at 10 a.m. this morning Pacific time, a paper that I've been working on with colleagues for the last 2 years finally appeared this morning in the International Journal of Obesity, which I'm actually quite excited about. And the title of the article is Obesogens, a unifying hypothesis on the pathogenesis of obesity. Now, your audience probably doesn't know what an obesogen is. An obesogen is a chemical in the environment that drives adiposity exclusive of its calories. So there are things in our diet that drive adiposity that have calories. And so people think, well, then that can't be an obesogen. But if it drives increased adiposity over what the caloric content is, then it would be. There are chemicals in our environment that we're exposed to, for instance, air pollution, PFAS, DDT, BPA, phthalates, flame retardants, parabens, and the list, chlorpyrifos, and the list goes on and on and on. They don't have any calories, yet they drive adiposity in humans as well. So the question is, if it's all about calories, and that's what virtually everyone thinks, because that's what the food industry has led us to believe over the last 100 years. If it's all about calories, how do you explain that? In addition, if it's all about calories, how do you explain why we have an epidemic of newborn obesity all around the world? If you do DEXA scans on babies born right out of the womb, they now weigh 200 grams more than they did 25 years ago. And when you look at the body composition on that DEXA scan, it's all fat. If it's about calories, if it's about calories in, calories out, if it's about, you know, gluttony and sloth, if it's about diet and exercise, I mean, how do you explain that newborns are being born obese? Well, because it's a little bit more complicated than that. And so this paper that I'm referring to actually delves into the four different models of obesity. One, the obvious, the energy balance model, the calories in, calories out model, which virtually everyone believes, perhaps you don't. Number two, the carbohydrate insulin model, which we started talking about, that, you know, the refined carbohydrate drives insulin release, and insulin release drives energy deposition into fat. And that makes a lot of sense, except that it doesn't explain the obese newborn, and it doesn't explain the epigenetics and the transgenerational inheritance. There's a third model. It's called the redox model. Whether or not you have increased oxidative substances can ultimately determine whether or not specific enzymes in the cell that are involved in the energy regulation pathway, for instance, AMP kinase, for instance, phosphatidylinositol 3 kinase. These are all kinases. Every one of these energy forks in the road are kinases, which means that they can be phosphorylated. Well, the degree of redox potential inside the cell determines whether or not any given molecule is phosphorylated or not. And that can then direct adiposity in a specific direction, having nothing to do with calories per se, but rather with electrical activity. And then finally, we have this fourth model, the obesogen model, the idea that chemicals can drive adiposity by binding to receptors and acting as what we call endocrine disruptors. So it sounds like there are these four different models of obesity, and they would have nothing to do with each other. Well, in fact, that would be wrong. They have everything to do with each other. And the purpose of the paper is to explain how, in fact, each of the four, shall we say, submodels actually contribute to an overlying unifying hypothesis that has to do with the chemistry of the cell and whether or not specific oxidative reactive oxygen species are driving adiposity. Now, it can be driving it in the liver by promoting insulin resistance. It can be driving it in the beta cell by promoting insulin release. It can be driving it in the brain by promoting increased food intake. It can even be driving it in the microbiome by altering cytokine expression. So what's interesting about it is all of the data on oxidative species all line up in the same direction, that if you increase reactive oxygen species, you get adiposity. And we know that reactive oxygen species are associated with adiposity. We didn't necessarily know they were a cause. So this is a very exciting paper because what it says is whichever model you subscribe to, you're right and you're wrong.
Mhm.
It's not the whole
Because
story.
it's bigger than that one
Because
model.
it's bigger than, exactly, it's bigger than the one model. That's the first thing it says. The second thing it says is that there are drivers of obesity and that they're all biochemical. Even the behaviors are biochemical. And that's really important because we have this, blame the victim.
Right.
And this basically undoes the blame of the victim because it's all biochemical. And the last thing it says is that really the only way to deal with this is prevention.
So that reminded me, so a couple of things. Number one, you see why we had to spend a little time unpacking some of those things like obesogens and adiposity. So thank you for your patience with me as I did it. Speaking of patience with me, I said something in error a few weeks ago, and a family member called me on it. And I'll tell you in just a second what that has to do with this clip. I said at one point that part of my own problem with prediabetes, diabetes was the fact that my father was north of 350 pounds at the time that I was conceived. That was wrong. We tried to figure it out, think maybe 200, 250. So you may say, well, it doesn't matter. It mattered to the family member, and I apologize for the error. What has that got to do with this? You remember Lustig said epigenetics and transgenerational stuff. Now, here's something that actually has to do with you as well. Over half of our viewers are 55 and older. 3/4 of them are male. Many, many of you have sons who are of childbearing age. What he was talking about is something that's been shown multiple times in labs, and that is a mammal, if the father is obese at the time of insemination or fertilization of the egg, that fertilized egg is likely to have greatly increased risk for prediabetes, diabetes, and dying early with the things that we're talking about, that redox equation, or that redox metabolism. And I suffer from that. I had, the same problem. So you may be beyond childbearing age, but think about that for your sons and your grandsons. Speaking of grandsons, he also mentioned that this epigenetic problem was also something transgenerational. It also goes to the second generation. So if you're a male, you think that what you're doing is not contributing biologically to your offspring, you're just contributing genes. No, you're also contributing how your offspring and their offspring, the next two generations, use their genes. So they can have great healthy genes, but if the father's obese at the time of insemination, there's a significant increase in risk for early death, blindness, kidney disease, and all these things that we're trying to avoid. Now, thank you so much for your patience as we went through that. Some of that got kind of deep. I realize that. Let's back off for just a second and bring on Heather and Jeannie. They're going to talk a little bit about a couple of things that we do in terms of bioindicators. You remember I said when people come to see us as patients, we get into tests, don't guess. We help them begin to see the bioindicators of this redox metabolism that Bob Lustig was talking about. Who wants to go first, Jeannie or Heather?
I can go first because I think the triglycerides is one of the things that we kind of look at initially before we get down to the HDL and LDL fluffiness. So one of the lab tests that we look at is the triglyceride level. And oftentimes we'll see elevated triglycerides, initially when we're reviewing labs with patients. And oftentimes, that goes back to insulin resistance, prediabetes, diabetes. As the insulin receptors become resistant, you lose that ability to be able to take glucose into the cells, but you also lose your ability to be able to burn fat. So that's part of the reason why we see those triglycerides become elevated in your lab values.
So very good. Thank you. Jeannie, you want to talk about the impact that this redox before Jeannie talks, let me just ask you one other thing, Heather. When somebody comes to us and they have high triglycerides, 100, 150, 200, what do we suggest? What do you suggest?
So we it depends. I mean, if they're looking at, we also look at, do they have insulin resistance, prediabetes, diabetes? And then we really kind of work with them based off of the whole lab picture. But in regards to triglycerides, we recommend reducing those simple carbohydrates, making those dietary changes, and just really kind of shifting their whole mindset to those dietary changes.
Thank you, Jeannie. How about this metabolism also impacts lipids? People think that high LDL is the driver. We tend to see high LDL much more as a bioindicator, and even more so, what we look at is loss of those large, fluffy HDL and LDL. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure. LDLs have always been called the bad cholesterol, and that's why people go to the doctor and get put on statins to beat those LDLs down. But we look much deeper than that. The HDLs are often called the good cholesterol, and they absorb the cholesterol in the blood, and then they carry it back to the liver, and then the liver flushes it out of the body. But when they start to have metabolic issues, the HDLs, the large fluffy ones, which we look in our fractionated lipids, we look at the large fluffy HDLs, they will start to get chewed up by the liver and used for energy. So, that's something we look at so many different factors when we look at metabolism. And so when we see the HDLs, the large fluffy ones not being where we want them to be, then we have to talk about diet and different things to help increase those numbers. And we have a lot of things we can do and intervene, with lifestyle changes to help make a difference in the fractionated lipids.
Thank you very much, Jeannie. We've got a lot of questions coming in about diet and managing weight. So let's, why don't you give us the transition, maybe the water ball, and then the transition into the Q&A. Okay. So you get. I think Gilbert, maybe somebody has their things on, their mic on. So JMK, you know what? Jesus, the answer Nazi's not here today. So he's doing some stuff with his family. can the two of you start looking down for people that are actually members? And I'm going to hit a couple that may not be. JMK, if triglycerides and cholesterol, and JMK's always slipping in there, even though he's not a member. If triglycerides and cholesterol are different lipid molecules, how does eating triglycerides increase blood cholesterol, LDL-C? Well, you hear that all the time. And I think, so many people, we've got this video where a lot of people actually worked with the low fat guys, specifically Caldwell Esselstyn. Caldwell Esselstyn has saved a lot of lives. You'll hear us criticize that low fat diet, and he's a low fat diet guy. Chuck Smith was a personal patient of Caldwell Esselstyn, lost 50 pounds, and we've got a couple of videos that Chuck made for us. Just look up Chuck Smith. That was actually our only action video. He had lost 50 pounds working with Esselstyn, was working out, gotten his Tesla to go home, and started having a heart attack. So he's not necessarily proud of what he did, but here's what he did. He put his Tesla in autopilot towards the hospital and started reaching into his back seat to find some nitrates to decrease that chest pain. So again, believe it or not, a real action video. You heard the story. They didn't recreate the scene. Anyway, Caldwell Esselstyn has saved a whole lot of lives, and he did it mostly by decreasing triglycerides. And it deals with the concept that JMK is talking about. Triglycerides are packed with calories. And as we said, there is some truth to calories in, calories out. You can't undo or ignore thermodynamics. And fat cells that are swollen with a lot of calories will start making it impossible for us to burn carbs, and then those carbs end up turning into triglycerides. We can't burn triglycerides. We can't burn carbs. Let me just skip over something and make a comment, JMK, that might help all of us understand it a little bit better. As we start taking on too many calories and storing too much fat, people understand very clearly love handles, storing fat, what we call sub-Q. The medical people call it sub-Q. The rest of us call it love handles or these genes make me look fat kind of stuff. Most of us that at least watch this channel understand body fat around organs, in the liver, around the kidneys. But very few people, even people that watch this channel, realize that LDL is one of the places where we store fat. As we start getting into that redox metabolism, the large fluffy LDL and large fluffy HDL, as Jeannie mentioned, start replacing that cholesterol that they usually carry with triglycerides. Those triglyceride-laden molecules start, as she said, they get used for energy by the liver. But beforehand, they are the boats that David Feldman refers to. He talks about the boats in the lipid energy model. You need more LDL to store those triglycerides. The difference between an LDL and a completely triglyceride-laden molecule, VLDL, is simply the number of the mixture of LDL or the proteins and fats. I'm sorry, I think I kind of butchered that last one with some of the hesitations and nonverbals. Bottom line is LDL stores and transports fats. That's how and why saturated fats can cause increase in LDL.
I see one here, Dr. Brewer, from Rick Folia.
Yep.
Is that the one? Yeah, that's the one. Triglycerides and cholesterol both traveling. Increased triglycerides goes along for the ride.
Yep. I think maybe Rick did a little bit better job. Thank you, Rick.
And then we have Lori from OP. I always thought that was Overland Park, but in Kansas, that's Orchard Park, at Buffalo Bills. Lots of snow there.
lot
I was
of
trying to be, hey, Susan, put up the members here.
that. I appreciate that.
Okay. And this one's thanking you, Dr. Brewer. Brad's thanking you for breaking it down so well.
Well, I appreciate that as well.
Here's a good one for you. Chris Linky says, I've been fat most of my life, heard every wackadoodle diet, tried a few. Now I'm hearing one called carb cycling. Is there any science that would back that diet model up?
There's some evidence. I haven't gotten too deep in terms of driving and looking at that evidence. The carb cycling diet is used more for younger people who haven't gotten into the redox metabolism, who or don't have at least acknowledged or don't have as much acknowledged prediabetes, diabetes-based metabolism. And basically what they're doing is helping try to drive some of the best parts of both metabolisms. And sometimes you get the worst parts. You'll see this a lot with bodybuilders. They want to bulk up. Insulin is a bulking hormone. It helps your body grow bigger. If we didn't have insulin, we would not make that transition from skinny 10-year-olds or 11-year-olds into full-sized adults. So it's a critical hormone during adolescence. Bodybuilders want to keep growing bigger and more muscular, so they keep cycling in and out of carbs. That's a shortened, maybe butchered up version, but that's is it great for weight loss? Not quite as good. It's a lot. Cycling carbs is usually a little bit better for weight gain.
Good. Here's another one from Woody Woodring. He said, you mentioned all the time, how does your body metabolize carbs? What tests actually track that? And that's a lot of the tests that we do. And there's a lot to metabolism, even beyond the tests we do. So I think there's a very complicated answer to that, but we're starting, our practice, we start to look at all the different factors that go in there.
Thank you. And that is a good question. It's basically, when you come in to see us, it's different from seeing other docs. We're basically letting your metabolism show you what's going on. Heather, Jeannie, do you see anything else we need to?
There's black tango, Dr. Brewer.
So for those of us who have plaque, should we avoid coconut oil? Is it a factor for CVD, and should we avoid it to be on the safe side?
Well, here's the thing. Coconut oil is a saturated fat, and you get a whole bunch of debate about that. One, because it's a saturated fat. Then the other folks that are pro-saturated fats say, oh, no, that's a big positive health thing. I did a video once on that debate. Bruce Fife is one of the guys that was on the other side saying, no, coconut oil is a health food. Well, it's, again, sort of like the 6 blind men and the elephant. They're both right, and they are both wrong. So the folks that look at, say saturated fat is bad, are right when they're talking about the big concentration of calories. And calories, as we discussed a few minutes ago, have to go somewhere. But they're wrong when we're looking at the hormones associated with fat management. Saturated fats, like coconut oil, just do not stimulate insulin. And insulin is that hormone that causes our bodies to grow bigger. It gets so important such that people that are on lower amounts of fat, higher carbs, you can often see a decreased basal metabolism. They stop burning as much just because their insulin is so high. So great question, Black Tengu. I just covered a couple of pieces of it, but again, they're both wrong. They're both right.
I think we have one more question here. Heather, go ahead.
Dr. O'Mara, so Peggy says, Dr. O'Mara says the love handles are also a form of dangerous fat, whereas the sub-Q fat other places is okay.
Yes, that's Sean O'Mara. Jesus was very excited. He's gonna be bringing Sean O'Mara on, and we're gonna talk about that. I love some of the stuff that Dr. O'Mara talks about. He was a physician, preventive physician to presidents and some of the higher level military and government officials. And I think he's just doing MRIs of the abdomen or the body and shows exactly what Peggy just mentioned. For some reason, fat around our organs seems to be much worse at releasing those enzymes or those hormones like resistin and screwing up things like leptin. Now, we also had another visitor who was very, very good at describing the science behind this. I'm blanking on his name right now. Mario Kratz. If you haven't seen Mario's discussion about fat threshold, you really should. So there's a lot of folks that know this concept that Peggy and Dr. O'Mara are talking about. And basically what they're saying is you can grow more and more sub-Q fat. And in fact, some people have a lot of fat sub-Q, but just don't have that much of this metabolic problem. And for some reason, they think there is a threshold. And once we get beyond that sub-Q fat threshold, we start adding fat in our organs, the fat that makes you metabolically unhealthy.
Dr. Burr, on that with the visceral fat, I did see this morning there was some new app that was being advertised that has an AI type driven model where it does a scan and then makes a workout for you. Have you seen that?
Oh, I haven't seen that. I think that's interesting. And that is this whole area that Sean O'Mara is talking about, that app, that's going after that same issue. And O'Mara talks about Hill intervals being one of the most effective ways of controlling that. So again, we talk a lot about science, but sometimes our patients get kind of polite. They listen, their eyes glaze over, and we say, so what do you think? And they say, well, that was all very interesting, but what do I do about this?
Yeah.
What can I do? Exactly.
And O'Mara's got a really good point about hill intervals, if you can do it. Running hard uphill is really good.
I'm interested.
Mm-hmm.
I'm interested in seeing what the rebounding trampolines are becoming really a big thing. So I'm interested in someone doing some research on those.
Yes, the legs are very important for helping us control this. They are our best internal safety valve for someone in a redox type of metabolism.
Absolutely.
Yep.
It's like a free.
So, anything else before we all break and go get to work? Well, again, it's been a tough, dense, very scientific presentation today. I really appreciate those of you who hung on, and hopefully there's some tidbits there that you can use. Thank you for your interest.